Thank you so much, Karen, for being here on the podcast today. We are so excited and honored to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored. It's going to be fun.
It will be fun. For those who do not know you, I of course recorded an intro already, but in your own words, what do you say about yourself and your work and where you are today? I did a little bit of research also into your past and
Oh,
how, yeah, no, nothing too deep, nothing too scary,
I'm a sixth
but
line, so yeah.
you were apparently a nurse and a midwife.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so now you're doing all this work with quantum human design and the quantum alignment and quantum wellness. And so I would love to hear a little bit about, how you got to where you are today and what your work looks like in the world now.
That's a good question. That's a big question because I've been here for a while. But um, and it's a question honestly that I sometimes don't like answering. I'm going to, but I don't like answering because I feel like my journey is a little bit different than most people's journeys. I think most of my clients and most of my students and most of the people I think who have encountered my work usually encounter it when they're in the middle of a disruptive cycle. Something has happened where they are burned out, or the rug's gotten pulled out from under their feet, or they're really sitting in this sea of mediocrity going, I can't do this anymore. And I will say that I have had an unusual journey in my life because I don't really think I ever got disconnected from my sacral response as a manifesting generator. Or that core visceral knowing, and I have sat with that question for a long time, kind of wondering why did I not get disconnected from it. And I think the only answer that I can come up with is I was raised by two manifesting generators. My grandmother who lived with us for a long time was also a manifesting generator. I don't think they lived completely true to their type, but they certainly were. I certainly grew up in a household where it was pretty normal for people to follow their natural impulses. And I think I grew up in a family where there was a lot of narrative around the virtue of going at your own speed and doing it your own way. And I think that equipped me to sort of step into adulthood with that cemented in me already at a cellular level. So I will say I started off at 18. I started college at 16 because I'm a six line profile, which means I'm a late bloomer, but also I was very much in a hurry to get to that role model phase in my life. At 16, I started college. I got a degree in both journalism and nursing, which seems counterintuitive, but feels like it's really nicely blended in my life right now. I knew as a nurse, the first day I walked into labor and delivery, which was really my passion at that time, that there was no way I could work in an environment where I was taking orders from someone else. I couldn't. And so I very quickly, after working as a labor and delivery nurse, started to train as a midwife and eventually started my own midwifery practice, mostly because I felt like the way the system was set up, it wasn't serving women, and it wasn't really, it was a system that needed to be deconditioned big time. And I just, again, I followed my gut, I followed my sacral into that journey. That was a relatively short-lived journey because I ended up having children and couldn't really balance midwifery and having young children. That was very difficult. But I feel like that metaphor of midwife sort of stuck with me. I went from midwifery to training in 1998 as a life coach. Even at that time, which life coaching was kind of a rebellious thing to do, it wasn't the career path that it is right now. And even then, I couldn't really follow the rules that I was given. And I knew I had to integrate optimized wellness and well-being into it. So I very quickly went from life coaching to energy psychology to energy healing and other kinds of modalities like NLP, which I integrated into my coaching. And then human design just kind of fell into my lap in 1999. And so I ended up following my sacral, moving from Houston, Texas to Sedona, and very quickly after moving to Sedona, getting a job working for Human Design America and studying with Ra and working with Marianne Winiger. and stayed there and then, until my sacral couldn't respond to being there anymore. My sacral sort of responded to leaving there, and continued on my quest to look at how do I use human design as an integrated tool for wellness, and how do I use human design to midwife, because I feel like that's kind of how I use it, as a midwifery tool to midwife people's authentic selves in the most effective, fastest way possible. That's such a very short version. So,
I'm sure it is, but I loved listening to that. And there are a few things that you said that resonated with me personally. First of all, I'm 24 weeks pregnant, so the
oh,
whole just
congratulations.
about how, not wanting to take orders, as a manifester, giving birth in the way that I'm told that I have to give birth in is always like a challenge for me. So I relate to that. Also, I love kind of looking at the arc, the 4-6 arc, and
Mhm.
how yes, you always followed your sacral, but it was an evolution
Mhm.
of what those responses were. And it seems like you've really just along the way integrated every single thing that you and your manifesting generator self wanted to explore into the next phase and the next phase and the next phase. So I think that's so beautiful. And I love that you use the word quantum too, because I feel like that's such a manifesting generator word, like such
Okay.
a manifesting generator thing, right? Because you have all these different interests and you have found a way to blend them together into this quantum system that is
Mhm.
completely and uniquely yours. So that's so beautiful.
I want to just say something really quickly. I appreciate that you say that it's mine. I actually feel like it's not mine. I really feel like when I worked for Ra, he always talked about how one day he would write what he called the awakened Ravi Ching. That traditional human design, as he taught it, was designed to be spoken to the not self, your conditioned personality. And he passed in 2011, and he didn't get to complete that work. So I'm not going to say that it's Ra's work, but I certainly would say this is just a refinement of what Ra brought forth. So I really don't want to. I think sometimes it gets, the story of quantum human design gets told like I just took off and did my own thing. And I don't feel that way at all. I just felt like there was a gap in the evolution of the system, that if it wasn't filled, it wouldn't allow the system to mature the way that it has matured, I think, over the last few years, and will continue to mature. I'm curious to see where it'll go, because I feel like the system itself is kind of a living, breathing, evolving entity.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. And yeah, I can see how, with the collective consciousness evolving,
Mhm.
how the system that you've created evolves from the foundational system. So I love that. You mentioned narratives. So when you were talking before about kind of growing up in this household where everyone was a manifesting generator and following that response was part of that personal narrative, you talk a lot about that in the book as well, your book, Quantum Wellness. I'd love for you to speak on that a little bit more and how you see how our own personal narratives really shape just our entire experience and how we live.
Mm-hmm. I love that question because it sort of speaks to the heart of everything I like to talk about. So my obsession, and I think obsession is probably a good word at this point, with narrative really started in my midwifery practice. I got to where I could almost with 100% accuracy predict who was going to have a good birth, who was going to have an easy birth, and who was going to have complications, and really who was going to end up having to be transported to the hospital. And it took me a long time, because that was a very intuitive thing in the beginning, to really understand what was I dialing into that gave me that awareness. And I carried that question with me really for probably 10 or 15 years into my coaching practice, into human design. I could always hear people's stories, even when they weren't telling a story. I could see like what the metaphor, or the, I'll call it a metaphor, the core metaphor that everybody had, was in the way that they talked, in the language that they chose, in even the visions that they had for what they wanted and what they wanted to create. It was pretty easy for me to kind of instantly see like, okay, this is where this person's identity, which is the same as narrative, because and really when we look at the human design chart, identity and narrative both live in the G center, right? So That is our place for direction. That is sort of what we call in response to our quality of love that we have for ourselves. That is where we program what we call in. And it is, where we take our direction. And I just really got clear at a certain point that the stories we tell about who we are and how we are creating our perception of reality. When we break that down in a neurobiology to a neurobiological level, and we know that the brain is a ridiculously efficient organ. And part of the beauty of the brain is it has multiple systems that really are correlated and connected. And the way in which the brain really unifies itself in terms of perception and the way it interprets data, or we're talking about human design, it's an archetype based system. The brain even interprets archetypes in certain ways, is based on the meanings that it holds. And those meanings that our brain is holding and programmed to search for and programmed to notice and translate is our story. Our story creates those meanings. So if I have a story that says I don't deserve to be supported and I'm not worthy of receiving support, and many of us have that story, that's a story that lives pretty heavily in our conditioning field and on the collective level, not only on the personal level. If that's the story we're telling, first of all, you're going to be telling that story without ever telling that story. That's going to show up again in the language that you use. It's going to show up in your attitude. It's going to show up in your hope, or whether you have hope or not. And that story is going to be programmed into how your brain perceives the world. And anytime you encounter, not just mentally, but physically, because memory is physical and sensual, anytime you encounter anything that starts to feel like that narrative in your life. So if you see a dollar bill, or you watch people walk around with really expensive things that you wish you had but couldn't, or you were jealous of them, or you hated them because they have more than you and you're bitter or whatever, when you're having these experiences, your brain is translating that through a specific lens. When we change our story, we change our perspective. We literally shift our biology. We shift our immune function. We actually can, if we tell better stories, we actually can improve immune function. And we actually can even affect which genes get turned on and turned off based on the quality of energy we produce. When we tell good stories, we create from a place of coherence where our mind, body, and spirit are lined up. We're in a highly creative, activated state. And when we tell stories that aren't so great, we trigger low grade fight or flight responses, and our creativity shuts down, and we end up in reactive patterns.
Yeah, you said a lot there that, well, no, because I feel like there are so many layers to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you do talk about those different layers, in your work, in your book as well. And the one that you were just starting to touch on, the biology. So how these stories, how these narratives really sort of activate or deactivate
Mm-hmm.
certain mechanisms within our biology. Can you give some examples of how those narratives actually manifest physically for people, maybe that you've worked with or that you've experienced yourself?
Totally, totally. Actually, I'll start first with my research study that I did, which I completed 3 years ago. Um, there is a study that was done in 2005 in Harvard University, and in the study that they did in Harvard University, they had people come in who felt like they were stuck in a story. And the story they were stuck in was a story that triggered either a sense of disempowerment or sense of anger. And in the lab, they had people tell the story, and when they measured, before they told the story, they measured their IgA levels. Well, IgA is an immune marker, and an essential part of your immune system. When they had people tell the story and they went back and remeasured their IgA levels, what they found is that recounting a story that was traumatic, that stirred up anger, that stirred up a feeling of being victimized or disempowered, their immune response actually went down. Their IgA levels actually dropped in response to retelling the story. I've always been obsessed with that study because I didn't want to stop there. I wanted to know, well, okay, how do we fix it, right? And so in my research study, I went through the same beginnings of that Harvard study. I had people come in, I had measured baseline IgA levels, had them share a story, and then remeasured IgA levels and saw that, of course, the IgA levels dropped in response to sharing the story. Then I gave them a template to follow, to have them actually rewrite that story. And when I say rewrite the story, I mean literally rewrite it. Like I had them sit down, we had like a table with glitter and colored pencils and pens, and I said, you can rewrite the story in any way that you want. Um, except here are the parameters. You have to rewrite the story in such a way that as a result of what happened, and this is not condoning what happened, this is just reframing the perspective. As a result of what happened, I want you to write the story so that you walk away with a lesson that you learned, something that it catalyzed something important to you, that was important for your growth and your own shifting of your own perspective. Or I want you to write the story in such a way that you emerge from this story no longer the victim. And I told them, you can write the story in whatever way you want. You can add superheroes, you can get superpowers. It doesn't matter how you get to this new narrative where you are no longer the victim, or you've got this new lesson that you learned. Get there however you want, but I want you to rewrite your perspective on what happened. So almost everybody called in things like unicorns and magical creatures or developed superpowers, which I thought was beautiful. And then after they had written the story, I brought them back into the lab and I had them read the story to me. And then we measured IgA levels again. And what we saw is that the IgA levels then returned back. Not always all the way back to baseline, but they had significant elevation or return to baseline. So the words we use, the stories we tell, have the power to shift our immune response. And it starts to make sense when you start to look at long-term research studies. We know optimists live significantly longer. Optimists have longer telomeres, which are the end caps on your genes that are important indicators of longevity. We know that you can, part of what you can do to regulate type 2 diabetes is to shift your attitude and change your perspective. It's not the only thing you can do, but that's an important enhancer to working on healing the symptoms of type 2 diabetes. We know from, actually, there's a whole bunch of really cool research studies that came out this year about using the hero's journey as a template for storytelling, personal narrative and storytelling. And in these stories, there's 8 studies that were sort of done all together under one big overarching study. They found that when we start to look at our lives through the lens of storytelling, and we start to see ourselves as a main character in our story, and we're the hero in the story, then we become more resilient. We are able to cultivate more meaning, and consequently, we're better able to establish equilibrium or equanimity, is that the right word, in the middle of a situation where things feel out of control. So we're able to stand in the middle of a storm, a sea of chaos, and be the ones that hold the center. And I just think I love that, especially I think because right now more than anything, I think we need to be able to anchor ourselves in really good stories so that we can stay connected to what's true and what's truth as we navigate this really uncomfortable, unsettled geopolitical environment and the shift that we're in, I think.
Wow, there is so much in there as well. And I think you're totally right that being able to find meaning in even the things that happen that seem negative or even catastrophic,
Mhm.
finding something in there that gives us hope absolutely will shift. I mean, you can feel it in your body.
Mhm.
So, just out of curiosity, why do you think people, because we have all this research, we know these things, why are we not doing this? Why are, right?
I
Like,
want to know the answer to
I
that
know,
too.
but and I'm sure that within your own work, even people who maybe come to you and discover your work and open up their minds to all of this and really start to see, I'm sure there's a lot of resistance still, right? Why do you think that is? And do you feel like human design really plays a part in this, or can at least help us explain why that resistance is there and start to melt it away? Because it's definitely, I have found it's definitely a process for a lot of people.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, that is a big question, and there's about 80 different ways that I want to answer it. So, um, I'm going to start with sort of the one way, the more mundane way of answering it, and then if I forget to bring it back to the human design piece, I'm hoping you'll remind me to bring it back to that piece because I think it's an interesting exploration through the lens of the chart. The first thing that I would say is, we're pretty hardwired to survive. That's a big theme in that's really the root of instinct. And that survival instinct is pretty pervasive. And over thousands of years of surviving as a species, part of what we've learned to do or been conditioned to do is to protect ourselves against bad things, right? That's part of survival. And so it really, I think, makes us feel instinctively vulnerable to have a positive thought or a positive story or rewrite the story. Because I mean, if you think about it, I think it's a pretty common thing that when we start to think positively about something, have hope, I think most of us have some kind of hardwiring in the back of our minds. We're like, oh, that's great, but when's the other shoe going to drop, right? I think there's a sort of conditioning around that. And certainly, there's a protective mechanism around that. That is to a certain degree what PTSD is, right? It's like this fear that something is going to happen again. And so we cultivate and we store in the body this protective reaction, even though it's not really happening anymore. And I would even argue that most of us have, varying degrees of PTSD. I think anytime we internalize the message that it's not okay or safe for us to be who we are and how we are, we start reacting to the world rather than intentionally creating our world. Or, if we put this in human design terms, we react out of our splenic response. That's at 4426 versus moving over into the more intentional aspect of our being and create it with a frequency of energy or faith. The second part of the human design answer is that we are deeply conditioned by logic and reasoning. Our entire world is conducted, I think, is built on the logical circuit. And we're trained by the logical circuit. We go to school; it's all logical circuitry. The scientific methodology is logical circuitry. And if you go back to the start of the logical circuit in the 63, well, logic starts with doubt and suspicion. And so does the scientific method, right? A hypothesis is really just a codification of doubt and suspicion. Will this or won't this work, right? And so I think that our conditioning and reasoning and our logical conditioning collectively really kind of causes us to have a doubtful and suspicious response when we bring something new to the table. The thing that's really powerful about storytelling that I love is that storytelling, first of all, I have to just preface this by saying, the brain is efficient, but it's actually not very smart. It's kind of dumb. It processes on a metaphorical level, not on a literal level, which is why memory is so subjective, right? A lot of the ways in which we remember and memory eventually creates stories, it was highly subjective. It's filtered through our own experience. Oftentimes it's filtered through our own immaturity because a lot of our memories come from childhood and we're not even old enough to really be able to understand what we're processing. And because it's metaphorically based, it's translating information through stories. It's really what the brain does. And so when we go over to the more sensual creative part of the brain, or if you want to talk about it, if we talk about it through the lens of through the lens of human design, we talk about through the lens of the sensing circuit. Storytelling lives in the sensing circuit, right? We got the 56, we've got the 33, you've got the 35. Those are all terminal, terminal gates in the throat center. That sensual right side of the brain, that part of the creative process, bypasses logic. And when we tell a story, even when it's fantastical and we add superpowers and unicorns and whatever else we tell, because the brain is translating it metaphorically, what the brain hears is, oh, I can overcome this. Oh, cool, this isn't really the biggest problem that I thought it was. In fact, I have superpowers that I can use to transcend this. And the brain starts to open up to other ways of seeing the story without tapping into that doubt and suspicion that naturally kicks in the logical circuit. So, I personally think narrative psychology it's really just sort of a new branch of psychology that we're only just beginning to do a little bit of research in. I really think this branch of psychology is going to end up being pretty powerful in terms of shifting and changing our mindset and our perspective and how we see and experience the world. So
I think you're 100% right. And even in my own work, I've used the hero's journey a lot with just helping entrepreneurs see their business that way and
Mhm.
seeing the obstacles as, not blocks, but just things to navigate,
Mhm.
and being able to find those tools and creating those stories, I feel like really does help. So, where do you feel like, say someone comes to you and they are really resonating with everything that you're saying about writing a new story and they're, coming up on some of that resistance. Maybe they've actually experienced symptoms in their life, maybe in their relationships, maybe within their own health, things like that. Are there other tools in addition to like writing a story that you use to kind of help people to stay on that track and stay within that narrative to, just, I guess, keep with it, stay accountable to that? Are there other modalities or other tools that you use to help them do that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So
Yeah, tell
so
us.
I have an integrated system that I use. Um, and I just would say, as I'm sharing this, I am, even though I teach human design and I'm in the human design world, I'm not married to human design. I am married to the idea that we all need to be working on our story as quickly as possible, because the biggest story I think we all need to heal collectively is the story of our own self-worth and our collective value system. Because I think what we're seeing in the world right now is just rampant ego out of control, and that ego is not just about ego, but it's also about money and values, and it's led to competition and devaluing each other. So I'd like to see this healed pretty quickly, and I don't care how you get there, just get there. In the system that I have created, it's called the quantum alignment system. We use an integrated approach that uses human design as the storytelling tool and as a way of assessing where are you in your story right now. Then I've taken every element of the chart and integrated it with the emotional freedom technique. So I have actually have a huge manual this thick, where we take every layer of the chart and created EFT or tapping protocols that go with all those parts. In conjunction with that, we then also use flower essences. I work with the Bach flower remedies just to stabilize the energetic field until the mental and the emotional can integrate. And then we use a process called Story Lab, which is really what I just told you about, where then we go back and we rewrite the story now with a new perspective and then integrate it back into the body.
That I was just kind of smiling so big over here because I also use EFT with my work as well and integrating that with human design. So I didn't even know that that was part of your system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I find it very effective as well, even for myself.
Mm-hmm.
The tapping has helped me so much, even just in the moment of stress or nervous system response. I feel like it just grounds you so much, and you can't really. I don't think you can make a meaningful change when you're in that elevated nervous system state. It's like coming back to safety first as the foundation
Mm-hmm.
and being able to transform from that space. So, for everyone listening, obviously, of course, read Quantum Wellness because I feel like a lot of what we're talking about here is beautifully illustrated in that book. But can you give, a lot of our listeners are pretty familiar with human design, either curious or dabbling, all the way to, practitioners and experts. Is there something that you can give all of us to maybe a practice or something that can help us really take your work and bring it into our lives, like change our story and make a real change? I think a lot of us, it's like we learn these things and it's like we get these aha moments, these light bulb moments, and we get that burst of motivation to go out and make a change.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we just kind of go back to the old patterns. If there was one thing that you could say or give us to help us make an actual sustainable change that would help to change the narrative and move forward, what would that be?
It's pretty foundational. If we go back to the idea that traditional human design is a healing tool and or a prescription, the prescription then becomes, well, it's a prescription for what? And I think that the fundamental prescription that human design gives us is the prescription to get us back into the body. If you think about strategy and authority, first of all, I don't think it's supposed to be a permanent lifestyle because you won't need it at a certain point. It is a pathway to reconnecting with what does right feel like in my body and what does not right feel like in my body. When we become conditioned, especially in our modern culture, one of the very first things that goes out the window is our visceral wisdom. We have to learn. I mean, it starts before school, but you have to learn how to sit still, be quiet, don't get up. You can't go outside. You can't. I mean, this as a manifester, it's especially difficult, right? You have to learn to, in order to be able to follow the rules and stay safe, you have to shut your body down because your body is protesting. That's part of why kids are so quote unquote disobedient. They're not really disobedient. They're following their inner wisdom. And we tell them, no, you can't do that. And sometimes we tell them, no, you can't do that because we're projecting our own repression. And sometimes because we have these rules that we've been told we have to follow to be successful in life. So when we lose that vital connection, you can either numb it out and again, settle for mediocrity for the rest of your life. Or at a certain point, and this happens a lot, the body starts screaming. And when it starts screaming with pain and discomfort and injury and chronic illness. And if we don't listen to and recapture that vital connection to the body, we put ourselves at risk for experiencing lack of wellness, right? So strategy and authority reminds you what you need to pay attention to, especially in the body, to bring yourself back into that space where you're like, this feels right for me, or this doesn't feel right for me. And I think sometimes in our human design teachings we forget that piece. We get so excited about I'm a this type, or I'm a this profile, or I got this center and this gate, and we kind of gloss over not so much the strategy piece, but certainly the authority piece. And I really think that the elegance of human design and really the power of human design lies in your ability to get reconnected with the body. All the other pieces start to fall into place. You don't really even need to know your chart if you know your authority and a strategy. You'll start to understand and logically live out, I mean, not logically, viscerally live out in an embodied way, the high expression of your chart when you have the courage and the experience, which is why we say it's an experiment, the experience of again and again and again, giving yourself permission to follow your body versus your mind. And I'm not saying the mind doesn't have a place. Let's not rule the mind out completely. It has its place, right? But really following that body response and letting that run the show until you really trust it, and until you really feel so completely aligned with what your body is saying in response to a thought, an idea, what somebody says, what you read, what you dream about. I think at a certain point you can take it off the material plane, even as long as you trust the body.
I love that so much. And I know for me, when I'm teaching, I'll always say, living your design has consequences. It's because
Mm-hmm.
following your authority can have radical consequences. You're going to make choices that people don't understand. You're going to lose relationships because of it. You're going to change direction because of it. You're going to potentially radically change your life because you've realized that the path that you're on isn't the one that's right for you. But that kind of courage. I love that you use that word. That courage that is alignment, I think, or at least part of it. So I love that you said that. Just one last question out of curiosity, where do you see the future of health and wellness going? I feel like a lot of people are waking up to a lot of what you're teaching on, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of what you're saying. And I'm curious, especially, a lot of these things are coming out, even mainstream too,
Mm-hmm.
where we're losing a lot of trust in where the medical system, especially in the Western world, has gotten us to. So
Mm-hmm.
where do you feel like we're going? How do you feel like this is going to evolve? Do you think there's going to be more integration, or do you feel like there's going to be more division? What's your take on that?
um I, I you're asking a big question here at the end.
I'm sorry.
So, I mean, this is a big question. It's like a part of my mission statement. So I'm really a big fan of integrated medicine. I mean, that's my PhD is in integrated medicine because I don't think that we're going to completely replace allopathic medicine. You're always going to have things that happen, like you're going to break your leg. You're not going to want to put flower essences on your broken bone. I mean, I'm not anyway. I'm going to want to go to the emergency room and have it set and take care of it because that hurts, right? Um, so, it has its place. There is a place for emergent, acute healthcare. But we're looking at right now, I mean, when you and I are recording this, everybody's health premiums have just gone up like crazy, right? We're looking at a healthcare system that is not integrated, is emergency oriented or symptom oriented, and isn't really creating wellness in people. And I think when we talk about what's next, I certainly, or what do I see in the future, or what do I hope for in the future, I would really like to see, first and foremost, when you go in to be treated for something, or even proactively if you go in for checkups, I would really like to see healthcare practitioners obviously address the body, but also ask important questions like, talk to me about what's going on in your life right now. What's your level of stress? What was your family of origin like? I mean, I think we're kind of getting some of it in psychology. We've got our ACEs scores. We're sort of starting to really think about the bigger picture of what creates long-term health and wellness. And we know like trauma in childhood makes people vulnerable physically in adulthood. But beyond that, we have to really start looking at what's the metaphor that's creating the pain in the body. Because if we can get in there and reframe the narrative and tackle the metaphor, then we don't create a cycle of people who come in, get their pain treated, go home, and then get the pain reactivated because they haven't solved the underlying story. I also would really, I think I'm really passionate about energetic medicines. I think we are so in love with pharmaceuticals, and I think we've been conditioned to be in love with pharmaceuticals that we don't, or we have lost the ability to integrate frequency medicines like flower essences and homeopathies, or even plant-based modalities, particularly in cases where you're not acutely ill, you're just not well. And I think, again, certainly, I mean, I'm literally here because of antibiotics. I'm literally alive because of chemotherapy. So I'm definitely think there's a time and a place for hard medicines, and we need to look at how do we balance that out, and how do we prevent acute issues in the first place, and certainly how do we prevent chronic issues. And I do think that underneath it all, there's probably two things we need to work on addressing in every single human being, and that's their sense of lovability and their sense of self-worth. And lovability, and I think we healed everybody's lovability and self-worth, our bodies would be in a completely different state of wellness.
Yeah, I'm nodding my head like crazy over here to everything that you just said. And I know Ra always said that human design is for the children.
Mm,
And, if we can truly see our children for who they are, not what we're projecting onto them, not what the world is projecting onto them, and we can meet them where they are and we can nurture them accordingly, then we do inherently, without even trying,
mm,
we do give them that sense of lovability. We do give them that sense of worth and feeling seen and understood,
mm,
that I think not only will it that in itself help so many of these surface level behavioral issues, but also health issues either now or down the line. So yeah, this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being
thank you.
here. Can you please share with our audience where they can experience more of your work? All of the links, of course, will be in the show notes, but just tell us where they can find you and where they can engage with everything that you have going on in the world.
Awesome. So probably the first place to go is quantumhumandesign.com. And even if you're new, even if you're an old timer in human design, if you go to quantumhumandesign.com, or you can go to freehumandesignchart.com, you can run your chart using the quantum language. So you'll see not only the traditional language, but also the quantum language for your chart. And that, of course, comes with a report to help you explore what does that really mean. My book, Quantum Wellness, which came out in August of this year, is available on all major online book outlets. And I'll say, I don't know when this is going to come out, but our 2026 Quantum Human Design Evolution Guide just came out this week as well. So we have a book that I publish every year that helps you go through the transits, and it actually has EFT setups for all of the gates in there, and really fun journaling prompts as well. So
I've seen that one. That's the one where you go, you follow the sun all year and where the
sun,
sun goes.
Earth, Mercury, nodes,
Oh,
all of the things.
amazing.
Yeah.
I'll be getting that one for sure. Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you so much. And like I said, all the links will be in the show notes. And are you also on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on social media. I'm Dr. Karen Parker 22. That's the number of my Chiron is highlighted by the gate, or rather my Chiron highlights the gate 22. So I love the number 22. So Dr. Karen Parker 22 on Instagram and Facebook. YouTube is Dr. Karen Parker. I think that's all the places where I am at the moment. So,
Excellent. Thank you. And also, side note, my North Node is in 22.
oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I have
Okay.
Aries
Thank
on my
you so
arm.
much. And thank you to our listeners as well. We appreciate you.
Thank you.